Shabbat Shalom, Moshi'im, and this is us. This is Unwalled Synagogue, and you can call me Rabbi Moshi'im or Rav Moshi'im, or you can not call me Rabbi. You can just call me Moshi'im. Whatever works for you. Either way, I'm here to teach, and I wanted to focus on today's parashot because I thought it was very interesting. Wanted to share some cool things about it. So this week's parashah is parashot Tazria, which means she conceives. And then we have in this year, in regular years, you read them, I believe you're supposed to, let's see. And in regular years, you read it with Tazria and M'tzora that follows it. You read those two Torah portions together, parashah 27 and parashah 28. But in leap years, you read them separately because you need like an extra, you have extra weeks and stuff, extra days. So, and again, I'm using the CJB, Complete Jewish Bible translation, translated by David H. Stern, as you can see. So, but I wanted to go look at this Torah portion because there's a lot of cool, interesting things. There's some cool things happening in it. Cool things, I say cool things. We got like people being unclean from leprosy or tzara'at. That's cool things, right? Not cool exactly if you're suffering through it. Leviticus 12, Vayikra 12, verse 1. I'm actually gonna, let's just start reading. Adonai said to Moshe, "Tell the people of Israel, if a woman conceives and gives birth to a boy, she will be unclean for 7 days with the same uncleanness as in Nidah." Nidah is time of separation from women. In other words, time of the month. PMS, also known as having her period. So it's God is saying that according to the Torah, a woman, when she's going during that time of the month, she's unclean during that time. And so just like that, after giving birth to a child, a woman is unclean, as in the time of the month. When she is having her menstrual period, okay, that explains it right there. I didn't even have to say anything. Verse 3, on the 8th day, the baby's foreskin is to be circumcised. She is to wait an additional 33 days to be purified from her blood. She is not to touch any holy thing or come into the sanctuary until the time of her purification is over. But if she gives birth to a girl, she will be unclean for 2 weeks, as in her nidah. And she is to wait another 66 days to be purified from her blood. When the days of her purification are over, whether for a son or for a daughter, she is to bring a lamb in its first year for a burnt offering and a young pigeon or dove for a sin offering to the entrance of the tent of meeting, to the Kohen. He will offer before Adonai and make atonement for her. Thus, she will be purified from her discharge of blood. Such is the law for a woman who gives birth, whether to a boy or to a girl. If she can't afford a lamb, she is to take 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, the one for a burnt offering, the other for a sin offering. The Kohen will make atonement for her, and she will be clean. Kohen means priest in Hebrew. But anyway, Okay, so here's the cool thing about this. Very short chapter, only 8 verses long, maybe the shortest chapter in all the Word of God. Seriously. But here's the cool thing about it. Right here we see clearly where, one thing that's interesting is that a woman, a daughter, if she gives birth to a daughter, she's unclean for 66 days. But for a son, she's only unclean for 33 days. This does not imply, as some cultures might attribute or portray, as some cultures act as though men or boys were more valuable than women. We all know that, yes, for the sake of inheritance, people wanted to have boys, so they could do that because if they had a daughter and they gave her the possession, it might pass, the territory would pass into the possession of her husband, and things like that would have to be a concern. But there's even precedents in the Torah where that wasn't the case, that the daughters of Sifalchad in the Torah, but that's a different story. A lot of people, this doesn't necessarily imply that. I've even been reading or hearing about, while I was at Shalom synagogue back in the day, text that implied that the reason for this, it being twice as long for a daughter, is because when you have a daughter, it's just like having two children, because she is for the rest of her life. The daughter, she's a, child to her parents, just as a son would be perpetually, but also she's going to take on her husband's name when she gets married. And so she has a dual role that she has to play. She's always going to be their child, but she's also always going to be a part of her husband. And so one flesh. So, she has to play both roles, is why they say that it's like giving birth to two children. That may or may not be exactly why. I'm open to, interpreting it that maybe that's not the reason why. That's not what God said in His Word. So we don't have any reason given in here for that. But it's possible. It's possible. Personally, I don't know. I don't know why that would be done that way. I don't know. We all know that men have the XY chromosome, as it's called, and women an XX chromosome. Not sure if that has something to do with that. I don't know. But regardless, I think what I want to focus on is something that I've seen talked about. I remember browsing through Reddit is where I first heard about it. And I was just curious, learning all kinds of things and browsing in different places online. Some places not so great. A lot of places pretty great. You have people that I was doing my own version of sex ed and trying to learn things about sex and just anything about the female anatomy, about how this works, how that works. I realized I knew nothing, and I was afraid that I get married and we have our time together on our honeymoon and I hurt my wife or do something that's insensitive. I wanted to know exactly what God wanted me to do and how to do it. So I wanted to be able to be a decent husband. So I loved learning about some cool things, and one thing I learned about that was kind of frightening that I didn't know, because at this point I'd already known enough of Torah to know that this was wrong. I remember reading about what's called the husband stitch. This is not a very popular practice that's done nowadays, but it is still done to this day in this country, in the United States. And it's kind of gross. It's pretty gross. So the thing is, clearly, as in the time of Nidah, God says that a man should not, sleep with his wife during her time of Nidah. In the same sense, your wife should be left alone to rest for her body to recover from having a child, from giving birth. It's absolutely necessary. Aside from the fact that her getting kind of graphic, her vagina has had to dilate to a certain degree. Sex wouldn't even be wouldn't even be enjoyable for him, let alone her. So I imagine, having never been there before, I don't know, but I imagine it probably would be an all-around uncomfortable, displeasurable experience. The woman should be allowed to rest. She, has earned that. She's gone through childbirth, for crying out loud, pushed the whole living being out of her body. That was painful and one of the greatest pains that a human being can suffer. Kudos to women who go through that. But now you want her to put out for you as the husband. It's her wifely duty. Women were treated like property. Let's just be honest. And even in the Bible times, you have many men who abuse their wives as such. That's not okay. And I do not at all believe that it's God's will. And this is part of why God instituted this in His Torah, so that women will be treated fairly and given time to rest. You may think, He calls them unclean. Being unclean is not necessarily a bad thing. Even priests become unclean performing their priestly duties. The Kohanim can become unclean for a good reason. And it's not even something that they do wrong, like the ashes of the red heifer. That's the portion that talks about that. After handling those ashes, you become unclean. It's not necessarily wrong. Becoming unclean does not mean that you're bad. Sometimes it's absolutely necessary, as we'll read later on. The problem, though, is that God is trying to set apart women for rest and let them have their time, much needed time to recuperate emotionally, mentally, physically. And the husband stitch apparently is a practice where doctors, when performing post-natal or surgery on women after they give birth, I think even right there in the hospital, directly after giving birth, they would I'm not sure if it's only in the case of having a C-section, cesarean section, where they cut the baby out of the but I think it's also just in general, and part of the aftercare for a woman who's in the hospital, who's just delivered a baby, that when they take care of her, part of that take care would be to perform the husband stitch, which, and it's coming kind of graphic, but they would sew up the woman's vaginal opening, and to some extent with some kind of some surgical thread or whatever to make it tighter, so that the husband could still use his wife for sex, right after childbirth. You might imagine, well, he couldn't, you can, it's, according to Torah, it's completely okay for a husband to have sex with his wife right up until she gives birth. Like, in some cases, some doctors even recommend and ask the wife if she'd like, her husband to be, induced into labor via sexual stimulation. That can help relieve stress and pain, so that's totally, absolutely can be a good thing. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, there's nothing wrong with having, and in some cases, your wife may even, some women experience increased sexual arousal and desire for sex and need for sex when they're pregnant, right? The hormones and all that. So there's definitely a place for that. But, regardless of how you feel about that, after she gives birth, she needs her time apart. This whole husband stitch thing is pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy. Mutilating a woman's body for the sake of the man's pleasure. That's just wrong. That's just wrong. But now to the 13. Now the thing that I wanted to get into, talking about tzara'at, leprosy. Okay. Here's the cool thing about that. A cool thing about leprosy. Here's the interesting thing about it. Okay, so starting at Vayikra 13 verse 1, Adonai said to Moshe and Aharon, if someone develops on his skin a swelling, scab, or bright spot which could develop into the disease tzara'at, he is to be brought to Aharon the Kohen, or to one of his sons who are Kohanim. The Kohen is to examine the sore on his skin. If the hair in the sore has turned white and the sore appears to go deep into the skin, it is tzara'at, and after examining him, the Kohen is to declare him clean. If the bright spot on his skin is white, but it does not appear to go deep into the skin, and its hair has not turned white, then the Kohen is to isolate him for 7 days. On the 7th day, the Kohen is to examine him again, and if the sore appears to be the same as before and has not spread on the skin, then the Kohen is to isolate him for 7 more days. On the 7th day, the Kohen is to examine him again, and if the sore has faded and hasn't spread on the skin, then the Kohen, the priest, is to declare him clean. It is only a scab, so he is to wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab spreads further on the skin, after he has been examined by the Kohen and declared clean, he is to let himself be examined yet again by the Kohen. The Kohen will examine him, and if he sees that the scab has spread on his skin, then the Kohen will declare him unclean. It is tzara'at. That's the end of verse 8. Looking at verse 45, by the way, Vayikra 13:45, just skipping ahead, it says, everyone who has tzara'at, or leprosy, sores, is to wear torn clothes and unbound hair, cover his upper lip, or her upper lip, and cry, unclean, unclean. Verse 46, as long as he has sores, he will be unclean. Since he is unclean, he must live in isolation. He must live outside the camp. So, pretty terrible, right? It's bad enough to have it, right? How many people in the world may have HIV or AIDS or something like that, or a venereal disease or some kind of other disease or cancer? You have no idea. They just walk about, you have no idea. But when someone has tzara'at, a very visible disease, by the way, unlike those other ones that I mentioned, they aren't always visible. They have to go about with torn clothes, unbound hair, and cover their upper lip. And in many cases, they're not even allowed in the city. They must live outside the camp. So imagine that you're isolated and you have to call out to yourself. You have to call out loud and act in a way so that everyone can identify you as one who's sick. Being outed like that, it's pretty horrifying, man. Pretty horrifying. Looking at that, I wanted to go into the sin of pride. Because in my understanding, looking at different instances wherein people had tzara'at, we see where it was brought on by something. So when we go into M'tzora, the parashot M'tzora especially, we talked about it. And one of the things it talks about, it's very, very significant, is specifically, let's see. Actually, I think it's at the end of Tazria. The Haftarah portion for Tazria is 2 Kings 4, chapter 4, verse 42 through chapter 5, verse 19. Let's look at it. I think this is the one I'm looking for. It's the one that talks about, Naaman, the commander from Aram. You read this story before. I had to dip into Jordan 7 times, right, to be clean. Okay. Just to give you just a quick synopsis, let's just read a few of the opening verses of it, just so you can know what the context. Or I can just share it with you. 2 Kings, chapter 4, verse 42. This is the Torah portion for Tazria. In other words, the portion after the Torah portion that you read from the Bible to, learn more about God and gain an understanding on what God is saying in His Word. Okay. Let's see. So, starting at I'm going to go ahead and jump to chapter 5, verse 1 of 2 Kings. Naaman, commander of the king of Aram's army, was highly respected and esteemed by his master, because through him Adonai had brought victory to Aram. Notice, by the way, that God is clearly saying that God brought victory to this foreign nation through Naaman. So, clearly God was pleased with this man and used him to bring victory to a foreign people that were not Israel. But although he was a brave warrior, he also suffered from Tzara'at. Now, on one of the raids into Israel's territory, Aram carried away captive a little girl who became a servant of Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "I wish my lord could go to the prophet in Shomron. He could heal his Tzara'at." Naaman went in and told his lord, "The girl from the land of Israel said such and such." The king of Aram said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. 600 pounds of silver, 6,000 pieces of gold, and 10 changes of clothes." And one thing he said, "Hey, you'll see that basically said, hey, here's my dude, Naaman, you know what I'm saying? You want to be healed, you know what I mean? So go ahead and do that. Appreciate it. Here's some silver, gold, and clothes. Thank you, sir." And the king of Israel went crazy, like, "How am I supposed to do this? Am I God, able to make someone clean?" By the way, he says in parashot, I think Tazria M'tzora, when you go into the land of Canaan and you see a house where an eye have put an infection of Tzara'at, God is saying the eye put the infection there. That's what God said. And here you have it confirmed again, where God says, "Hey, I'm God, able to kill and make alive, able to make someone." Clearly, God is the one who does these things. So a lot of people want to say when things negative happen, oh, that's Satan. And when good things happen, that's God. But the teaching, and this is a very Jewish saying, "Ein el levado." There's no God but Him. Meaning that there's no force behind what things happen in the world, other than God. God is the ultimate force behind everything. If good happens, God did it. If evil happens, God did it. But there's a purpose behind it. If God does things that we perceive as harmful or evil, the wise person seeks God's face to understand why. Maybe God is punishing me. Maybe there's something I'm doing wrong. Maybe I'm just lacking wisdom in my ways. Let me ask of God and find wisdom. God is not withholding from anyone who seeks Him with a pure heart and with faith. I don't care whether you're a believer or atheist, whoever you are. You go to God with an upright heart, and you want to know He will not hide Himself from you. I fully believe that. But God doesn't answer pride. But right here, what I want to focus on is where Elisha the prophet tells him to go dip into Jordan 5 times or 7 times and he'll be healed. But what his reaction to that was this. So Naaman, verse 9. So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him who said, "Go and bathe in the Jordan 7 times. Your skin will become as it was, and you will be clean." But Naaman became angry and left, saying, "Here now, I thought for certain that he would come out personally. He wanted to be esteemed, wanted to be glorified. He had this pride and arrogance. I want this guy to come out and recognize me personally. Why didn't he come and do that? And now he wants to do this." He said, dissing, this straight up dissing the land of Israel. He says, I thought he would come out personally and he would stand, call the name of Adonai his God, and wave his hand over the diseased place and thus heal the person with Tzara'at. Aren't Amanah and Papar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the water in Israel? Keep in mind that Israel at this time is going through famine, all kind of bad things. So yeah, their streams are probably pretty dirty at this time. They didn't have a lot of rain, a lot of water going through. They were in a disfavorable position right now because they had been disobedient to God, and God's wrath had caught up with them. Why can't I bathe in them and be clean? So he turned and went off in a rage in his arrogance. One of his servants said, "My father, if the prophet had asked you to do something really difficult, wouldn't you have done it? So doesn't it make sense even more so when it's just bathe and be clean?" So he went down. This is not word for word. I'm saying, I'm just kind of paraphrasing. He went down, bathed, and was clean. And he said, "Oh, there's no other God but the God of Israel." And he goes on. But the story is, the things that came about was the pride. So then he said, "From now on, I will only worship this God of Israel," and said as much. How awesome is that? But that's the thing about it. Were there other, and as what was the Yeshua that talked about it? Weren't there other lepers? Was Naaman the only leper? Weren't there other lepers or people with Tzara in Israel at that time? But only the foreigner from Aram, Naaman, was healed. Just, it'll show you, God knows what they're a person. Doesn't matter what you are. It's all about, God answers faith. He answers action. He answers what's in the person's heart that bears fruit in one's deeds and one's words. Okay? Now, looking at that, let's look at also Bamidbar 12. So looking at, trying to draw a link between Tzara'at and pride, and why I say that the sin of leprosy, the disease of leprosy seems to be linked to the sin of pride. Okay? And Naaman had that and was humbled and humbled himself to just glorify God. But just making a connection here. Naaman got angry and proud for a moment, but humbled himself and had his Torah taken away. He would humble himself enough to just obey what God said. That is great. That takes humility in people, to just do what God has asked, and then to see the blessing that comes from it. That takes humility. So that's a good thing he did. But now looking at Miriam in Numbers chapter 12, or Bamidbar, or Bamidbar, in the desert, is what that means, in the wilderness. But some people, the book is also known as Numbers. So chapter 12, Miriam, and Aharon, Aaron, began criticizing Moses, on account of the Ethiopian woman he had married. For he had in fact married an Ethiopian woman. They said, "Is it true that Adonai has spoken only with Moshe? Hasn't he spoken with us too?" Adonai heard them. Now this man, Moshe, was very humble, more so than anyone on earth. Suddenly, Adonai told Moshe, Aharon, and Miriam, "Come out, you three, to the tent of meeting." The three of them went out. That's the end of verse 4. I want to stop there for a moment to say, okay, I know that in either the Talmud, what's called the oral Torah in Jewish tradition, the Jewish faith, in Judaism, and also the rabbis and sages say that the actual sin that Miriam and Aharon had committed in speaking against Moshe, the reason why they had done that is because to them, they saw him as taking his time from a previous event that had happened wherein all the people were supposed to return to their wives. The husbands were supposed to come to their wives, but didn't, Instead of coming to his wife to spend time with her like you're supposed to do as a husband, he refrained, and even though he was serving God, they were like, he's not even taking care of his wife. How can these guys no good, right? That's what the rabbis and sages want to say. I believe that is false. Is it a lie? Whether or not they knew better, you could argue, but that is false. I fully believe that the actual reason, and it goes into it here, because right here in the Torah, it lists her ethnicity or her nationality twice. I believe this was the reason they had an issue with Tzipporah, wife of Moshe. It was because she was Ethiopian. It seems like the issue they had with her was that she was Ethiopian. He married this foreign woman. Well, keep in mind, just like Ruth, Tzipporah had made a decision that she wanted to serve the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, and she was willing to actually do that, and that's why she became his wife. She even was the one that circumcised his children when Moshe himself refused to. It was a matter of, and I feel like maybe on that account, he didn't recognize his own sons as belonging to, maybe he thought, well, they're the daughter of this Ethiopian woman, and I don't know, it just doesn't seem like, they're not really my sons, but God made a big deal out of it. And maybe he was dealing with the fact that he didn't view them as really his because they were born in a foreign land to a foreign woman. But nevertheless, God was like, no, he just circumcised them and was going to kill him. But Tzipporah circumcised his sons. Wow, she saved her husband's life. That's a woman of God. But her being Ethiopian, I believe that's the actual reason they spoke out against their own brother Moshe. Now looking at that, God calls him out to come out to the tent of meeting, regardless of what the reason is, whether it's because he didn't spend time with her, or Moshe married this woman, right? Well, But regardless of the other reason why, I think it was because of her race or ethnicity or nationality. But verse 5, Adonai came down in a column of cloud and stood at the entrance to the tent. He summoned Aharon and Miriam, and they both went forward. He said, "Listen to what I say. When there is a prophet among you, I, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. But it isn't that way with my servant Moshe. He is the only one who is faithful in my entire house. With him I speak face to face and clearly, not in riddles. He sees the image of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Who is the image of Adonai? Yeshua the Messiah. So why weren't you afraid to criticize my servant Moshe? The anger of Adonai flared up against them, and he left." Verse 10. But when the cloud was removed from above the tent, Miriam had tzara'at, as white as snow, leprosy. Aharon looked at Miriam, and she was as white as snow. Aharon said to Moshe, "Oh my Lord, please don't punish us for this sin we committed so foolishly. Please don't let her be like a stillborn baby with its body half eaten away when it comes out of its mother's womb." Moshe cried to Adonai, "Oh God, I beg you, please heal her." Adonai answered Moshe, "If her father had merely spit in her face, wouldn't she hide herself in shame for 7 days? So let her be shut out of the camp for 7 days. After that, she can be brought back in." Miriam was shut out of the camp for 7 days, and the people did not travel until she was brought back in. Afterwards, the people went on from Hazarot and camped at Paran Desert. Now, it doesn't explicitly say she was proud. Here's what I'm getting though from what's happening. It mentions Miriam and Aharon began criticizing Moshe at the beginning of chapter 12, verse 1. The fact that her name is mentioned first makes it seem that she was the ringleader. Now, seeing that she's mentioned first, it seems like Aharon kind of went along with it, as he did with the men concerning the issue of the golden calf. Some men did a thing, and he just kind of went along with it, and that's the excuse he gave when Moshe questioned him, and they had gone astray. But regardless, they were speaking ill of the man of God, and God corrected them. Now, why was Miriam struck and not Aharon? I'm not sure exactly what the rabbis and sages have to say on the matter, but I believe it was a matter of the heart, a matter of pride. I believe as God was speaking, he could see how unrepentant Miriam's heart was. I believe Aharon was already trembling with dread at having to approach God. This is the man who was near God, the priest. I believe just his ancestor Levi was given the priesthood on account of the fear that was in his heart toward God, and God could make himself known to Levi because he feared the Lord and turned many from sins. So I believe that struck a chord, and Aharon, the fear of God, I believe that got to him. He humbly prayed and begged when he saw what happened to Miriam. I believe, this is what I perceive from the text, and just the small context clues, her name being mentioned first, the fact that she was struck with tzara'at after the cloud went up. I believe that was the issue. Not that she just spoke up, but even right there in the cloud, that she was unrepentant and in her pride. Even if not for that, the pride she had when she opened her mouth against Moshe. So to find something to criticize him, again to speak against him. She acted arrogantly, and I believe she had pride in her heart that when God called them all out, she was unrepentant until she was struck with tzara'at and had 7 days to think about it, put in time out, dealing with leprosy in time being. Another example of that, one more, to get toward the end of this teaching, is 2 Chronicles 26, verse 16 to 21. And this was especially important because it deals with pretty cool. It deals with one of the kings of Israel, one of the popular ones, one of the good guys, who was a good guy, but for a moment lost it all and did something he shouldn't have. So 2 Chronicles 26, verse 18 to 21, talking about King Uzziyahu. Uzziyahu had been, it says that he feared God, that he did what was right from God's perspective, and he began to rule, started at 16, and he ruled for 52 years. That's in 2 Chronicles 26, verse 3. He was a good guy. In Hebrew, they call 2 Chronicles Divrei Hayamim Beit. Don't worry about it. But going to 16, to verse 16, but when he was strong, he became arrogant, which caused him to become corrupt, so that he sinned against Adonai his God by going into the temple of Adonai to burn incense on the incense altar. Azariah the Kohen went in after him, and with him were 80 of Adonai's Kohanim, brave men. They stood up to Uzziyahu the king and told him, It isn't your job, Uzziyahu. Didn't even say King Uzziyahu, just Uzziyahu, to burn incense to Adonai. The job of burning incense belongs to the Kohanim, the priests, the descendants of Aharon, who have been consecrated. Get out of the sanctuary! Exclamation point. You have trespassed, and Adonai, God, will not honor you for this. Man, just laying it down on him, You had clearly disobeyed and dishonored God. This is not good. You need to go. Now you might think they were just speaking arrogantly, just trying to oppose him. They were speaking on his behalf. They were acting out of the fear of God. You need to leave because God is not pleased with this. Not only was the king and Debbie getting in trouble, but so were they. They were the ones supposed to guard his holy places, right? Got to give them that responsibility. This made Uzziyahu angry, verse 19, as he stood there with a censer in his hand, ready to burn incense. And in his anger at the Kohanim, Tzara'at broke out on his forehead right in front of the Kohanim in the house of Adonai, beside the altar for incense. Azariah, the chief Kohen, and all the Kohanim stared at him. There he was, with Tzara'at on his forehead. Quickly they threw him out of there, and indeed he himself hurried to get out, because Adonai had struck him. Uzziyahu the king had Tzara'at until his dying day. He lived in a separate house because he had Tzara'at, and was not allowed into the house of Adonai. Meanwhile, Yotam, the king's son, ran the king's household and was regent over the people of Israel. That's the end of verse 21. So here's the thing I want to point out. Not only was he proud, but in his anger at the Kohanim, right? His anger at the Kohanim. This is something especially that I wanted to point out. Just like Miriam and her brother, Aharon, Moshe's own sister and brother, were angry at the man of God, Moshe, the prophet, Hanavi, Moshe. So it was that someone had in their hearts nursed anger against nursed anger and hostility against a man of God, a child of God, a priest or a person that God had anointed and set apart. And Tzara'at broke out on them because of it. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. The correlation between pride and these things, between anger at the people of God specifically. Now, we all know that every authority is set up by God, Romans 13. This seems to allude to the fact, especially every spiritual authority, right? The priesthood, all these. So this seems to allude to the fact that ultimately they were rebelling against God. And they were angry at God for his ways. And they were directing that at his children, whom he had set up in place to do certain things. And they were rebelling against the people of God who were trying to do what God told them to do. Really different topic. So just want to talk about, thing that I've never been told by a group of people that an interaction I've had, and I probably should do a complete different video about this, but just on the topic of Tzara'at. And you heard it described by Tanakh with in the Tanakh, in the Bible, as it being a breakout and the skin turned white. In Miriam's case, white as snow, and there it was with King Uzziyahu, it broke out on his head, his skin turned white. I've had people try to use this, and it really worries me. I've had interactions with a group of people who define themselves as, I guess, a sect of Judaism, or as the main sect of Judaism, as they identify themselves as, the Hebrew Israelite movement. Hebrew Israelites, I've run into some that describe themselves as such, which seems like a strange way to identify oneself, because essentially they're both the same thing. If you're an Israeli, you're a Hebrew, you're a Yehudi. It's all a matter of which one came first. The Ivri, Hebrew, then Yisraeli, because Israel, then Yehudi, right? Because when he just had 12 sons, they might not have all referred to themselves as Jews, as Yehudim, except for any descendants of Yehuda. But since his tribe inherited the land and grew so much, it's called the land of the Judeans to this day. So back to the point, I've heard Hebrew Israelite members of that sect come to me, and one thing that they notice, they'll always catch me because I'm wearing tzitziot, and they'll see the tzitziot, they'll see these tassels, and they'll say, "Oh, hey, are you? They'll say, "Are you Hebrew Israelite?" I'm like, "No, I'm not." They'll say, "Well, okay, well, and they'll try to go at length to convince me to kind of see things their way. And the thing that always makes me curious is this. They never once have come to me and just wanted to know how's my observance. Am I keeping the Torah? Am I keeping Shabbat? Am I keeping and honoring Pesach? Am I keeping faith? Am I walking in righteous ways? It always comes down to, the white Jews are the synagogue of Satan because they have pale skin. And I've had a number of them even tell me that tzara'at, leprosy, the skin turning white, that's all the pale skinned Jews. That's them. They're evil. They have tzara'at. That's what that means. They're white. And it just breaks my heart that a people, maybe you identify as a Hebrew Israelite. Feel free to comment if you have a different viewpoint on that. But for one, all the men who have called me and said, and I identified as Hebrew Israelite, they're not wearing tassels. The one of them that was security guard, I gave him a ride via Uber. He himself said to me, he showed me, he lifted up a hidden place where he had something that didn't look anything like the biblical commandment of tassels, but not even a blue thread, just some weird kind of wrapped up thing. And was like, yeah, man, I got my tassels right here. Wasn't wearing it, wasn't making them visible enough for himself to see at least. So it's like, and I'm not trying to condemn him. I won't condemn anybody for not wearing tzitziot. I definitely commend it. I do and so teach. Wear tzitziot. That's a commandment. Do it. But at the same time, there are things that are more important. Sure, that should be done first. But it's always a thing where they want me to buy into the hate that white Jews are not real Jews. They're from Satan. And it's anti-Semitism. And on top of that, they esteem that them being black makes them, or African, makes them better than other people because of their DNA, because of their genetics. That's no different from the Nazis, no different from the, people, I heard the term, Aryan Brotherhood. That term Aryan actually came from the Middle East, I believe, from certain people from there, not from the Jews, but it wasn't a term the coin used for Caucasian men, or whatever, how you want to say it, until later on. But essentially, this whole idea that my genetics make me better than you, it's what I've had Jews who have come to me, Orthodox Jews, non-Messianic, who have tried to say that basically them being Jewish means that they're going to rule the world, that we'll all be slaves to them. I've had that happen at university, at a college, where I was sat with a table of Jewish women being introduced by a classmate where we were learning Hebrew class together. And I've had, when it came out that I was Messianic, they pretty much cut me off, had nothing to do with me. Was not rude to them, was nice to them, everything was fine. Once they found out I was Messianic, I was kind of, just cut off. That whole idea that my DNA, whether you're born Jewish or African or whatever, Hebrew Israelite, Orthodox Jew, whatever it is, that you're better than someone else because of your ethnicity, whether you're Caucasian, you have, your skin is dark, your skin is light, regardless, please understand, technically there's no such thing as black people or white people because, white is not, there's no person in the world that has white skin. No one has black skin. We have different shades, okay, from it's idiotic. And please, that's just something that I have to speak out on, because they use leprosy to defend the fact that, if you're pale, then you have leprosy. No, God's no respecter of person, okay? When it comes down to it, that's just completely hate-filled. None of them spend that. Every Hebrew Israelite I've spoken to, they just spend time spreading their hate. That's all that they've done. So I don't recommend that way of living. I don't abide by it. I recommend you don't as well. I don't condemn Hebrew Israelites, but I do notice that a trend within that movement that's worrying and concerning to me. So just want to point that out. By all means, even if you think that the African or dark-skinned Jews are the true Jews, regardless, unless your faith is in Messiah, Yeshua, you're not going to heaven. You're not going to make it. Unless you're obviously, that's excluding, obviously, like, stillborn children or children, who die, or things like that, things of that nature. But it's only through Yeshua the Messiah that anyone gets to the Father, only through the Son. So if you believe that if you're a Hebrew Israelite, my recommendation, put your faith in Yeshua, start living by Torah, start keeping His commandments, start wearing tassels with the blue thread, start keeping Shabbat, start doing the things that God said to do in connection with Yeshua, knowing that you're forgiven and that your salvation and your entry into eternal life is through Him. unmerited of his sacrifices, bloody sacrificial death, 3 days later rising from the dead, the first among those to be raised from the dead, the firstborn of those to be reborn. So just, that's what it all comes down to. And again, going back to the other thing about Tzara'at, it being a manifestation, as you can see, of a heart condition. So anyway, hope that blessed you. Shabbat Shalom. I expect a teaching this Yom Rishon about about civil disobedience. It's going to be quite dense. I'm going to have try to edit it. It may, hopefully it's not too messy, but may this teaching bless you. And in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your Shabbat, guys. Shavuot Tov. If you're catching this after Shabbat, may your week be blessed. And may you go about in spiritual purity and not nursing anger in your heart. There's a place in Kohelet where it says, he's talking to the young people. He's saying, abandon anger and don't harm your own body. I can't help but think that all these people, Miriam, King Uzziyahu, when they nursed anger in their hearts toward the people of God, how it directly affected their bodies with Tzara'at. In King Uzziah's case, permanently. So, there's a link there. Even medically speaking, I remember reading about how doctors have made a link between breast cancer in women and anger at the father or the mother. The woman's father or mother, and it being, if it's anger or unforgiveness toward the father, it's in one side of the breast, in the left or right breast, and if it's the mother, it's the other one. It's amazing how our feelings and emotions directly affect our health so dramatically. Even in Proverbs, it says that a joyful spirit, a good spirit, is strong medicine, is good medicine. So be of good spirit, walk in the Spirit of God, and if you have anger in your heart, take care of that. And, if you have anger or unforgiveness towards someone, take care of that. Especially if they're a fellow believer, go and talk to them, deal with the source of your anger, and don't leave room for the adversary. Don't leave room for an outbreak against your body, against your well-being. Our emotions directly affect our health very dramatically. It's very powerful. So take care of that in the meantime. And on that note, I'll see you guys next time. Shavuot Tov, Shalom, and Hitro.